The bride notice had been pinned to the post outside Harlan Rhodes's door for 6 weeks before he started to believe she was never coming, and he had spent those 6 weeks doing something he would never admit to another living soul, quietly hoping she would not. It was not cruelty that made him feel that way. It was fear, plain and simple, the kind of fear a man carries in his chest like a cold stone when he knows his life is about to split open and become something unrecognizable. Harlan was 28 years old, broad-shouldered from years of working a homestead alone at the edge of the Graywood territory, with calloused hands and dark hair that curled at his neck, and a jaw that had not seen a razor in 10 days. He had 140 acres of river-bottom land, a log cabin with a stone chimney he had built himself, a barn with 4 horses, 11 cattle, and more seed grain stored than most men in the Graywood Valley had eaten in their lives. By every measure of the frontier, he was a man who had arrived, and yet he was profoundly, achingly alone. His neighbor Gideon Pratt had arranged the match. Gideon was 60 years old and had 3 orcish grandchildren from his daughter's union with a clan trader named Boraz. And Gideon had strong opinions about the Treaty of Dunhallow and the peace it had built between the border settlements and the Mudborn clan. And one of his stronger opinions was that Harlan Rhodes needed a wife before that loneliness ate him alive from the inside out. The match had been brokered through the Dunhallow Council, an orcish woman from the Mudborn clan, 24 years old, a free woman who had chosen to enter the arrangement willingly through her clan elder's sponsorship. Her name, written in both the angular script of orcish tradition and the block letters of the frontier registry, was Rogash Mudborn. Harlan had read her name perhaps 100 times on that notice. He had traced the letters with his thumb late at night when the fire had burned low and the wind came hard off the mountains. Rogash. He did not know what it meant in Orcish. He did not know what she looked like. He did not know if she spoke his language, or whether she would want to speak to him at all, or whether she would look at his modest cabin and his rough-hewn furniture and his cracked stove plate and decide she had made a catastrophic mistake. He knew only that she was supposed to arrive on the 23rd of the month, and it was now the 26th, and she had not come. 3 days late, the morning of the 26th, Harlan was in his south pasture mending a fence line that the cattle had pushed through in the night, driving iron staples into cedar posts with a hammer while the late autumn sun climbed slowly over the ridge. He worked steadily, methodically, the way he did everything, because a man who worked steadily and methodically did not have to think too hard about the things he could not control. The sky was the color of hammered copper, cold and clear, and his breath fogged at his lips, and he had almost convinced himself that the whole arrangement had simply fallen through, that the Mudborn clan had reconsidered, that Rogash herself had thought better of marrying a stranger at the edge of known territory, when he heard the sound of hooves on the main trail. He straightened, squinting against the light. The figure coming down the trail from the Dunhallow Pass was on horseback, but barely. The horse was a gray mare with white stockings, moving at a limping walk, and the rider was hunched low over the saddle, one hand gripping the pommel and the other pressed to her left side in the way that a person presses when something hurts badly enough that pressure is the only answer. The rider was wearing fitted travel leathers, a laced bodice of dark brown leather over a forest green shirt, with leather riding trousers tucked into knee-high boots that were caked with 3 days of mountain trail mud. A short fur-lined traveling cloak was pinned at her throat and hung off one shoulder, as if the pin on the other side had given way. Her hair was dark as crow feathers and coiled into a thick braid that had come half undone, with wild strands whipping across her face in the morning wind. And she was an orc, unmistakably, beautifully, formidably an orc. Her skin was the deep gray-green of river stone, her jaw set and strong, her lower tusks rising just past the full curve of her lower lip, not the fearsome war tusks of the old clan warriors, but shaped and elegant, like everything else about her face. She had sharp cheekbones and dark amber eyes, and a mouth that was, even now, pressed into a line of absolute iron determination. She was the most striking woman Harlan Rhodes had ever seen in his life, and she was barely staying in the saddle. He dropped the hammer and ran. He crossed the pasture fence in one vault, boots hitting the trail dirt and carrying him at a full sprint toward the mare, who had stopped moving entirely and was now trembling with exhaustion. He reached the horse's head first, catching the bridle before the mare could shy, and then looked up at the woman in the saddle and found her amber eyes already fixed on him. "Rogash Mudborn," he said. "Harlan Rhodes," she said back, and her voice was deep and clear and had a faint accent like the sound of stones under moving water. It was not a question. She knew exactly who he was. "You are hurt," he said. "I was hurt 3 days ago," she said. "I am considerably less hurt now, so I suggest you manage your concern accordingly." He blinked at her. She blinked back at him, and there was something in those amber eyes, a kind of wary, measuring intelligence, a testing quality, as if she were watching to see whether he would flinch or argue or step back. He did none of those things. He stepped closer and reached up toward her, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow, the way he approached an animal that had been frightened but not broken. "Can you get down on your own?" he asked. A pause. The iron in her jaw flickered just slightly. "I would prefer not to need assistance." "I know," he said, "but you are going to fall if you try it, and the ground is hard, and I have already decided I would like to know you better than I will if you crack your head open in my front pasture." Something changed in her expression, not softness, not yet, but a fractional giving way, like the first crack in river ice. She released the pommel and shifted her weight, and Harlan put both hands at her waist and took her weight as she came down off the horse. She was solid with muscle, heavier than she looked, and her hands gripped his forearms as she found her footing, and for one moment they were standing very close together, her chest nearly against his, her face a few inches below his, her breath warm and sharp with cold mountain air. "3 days late," he said very quietly. "The pass flooded," she said, equally quietly. "Then a cairn wolf came for my horse on the second night. I drove it off, but it opened my side with one claw before I could get my blade into it." He looked down at her left side, where the leather was darker and stiff. "That needs to be cleaned and looked at." "It has been cleaned," she said, with a touch of frost. "I cleaned it myself with spirits and moss compress. I have been cleaning my own wounds since before you were cutting teeth, so I suggest you also manage that concern accordingly." Harlan looked at her for a long moment, and then, to her evident surprise, he smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes and changed his whole face, and Rogash Mudborn stared at it as though she did not quite know what to do with it. "I believe you," he said. He took the mare's reins and led both horse and woman toward the barn, walking at a pace that he quietly calibrated to let her keep up without appearing to be slowed for her benefit. He noticed she matched him stride for stride, even so, jaw set, one hand still pressed lightly to her side. She was, he thought, the most fiercely self-possessed person he had ever met, and she was limping on her right leg as well, and she was doing absolutely everything in her power to make sure he did not notice. He noticed. He said nothing. Inside the barn, he settled the gray mare in a stall with fresh water and hay and checked her right foreleg, which was swollen at the fetlock. A bad sprain, not a break, thank God. The mare had carried her rider across 3 days of mountain trail on that leg, which told Harlan something important about both the horse and the woman who had asked it of her. "What is your horse's name?" he asked, while he ran his hand carefully along the leg. Rogash was leaning against the stall partition, watching him work. "Ashbone," she said. "Good name," he said. "She is brave." He glanced up. "So are you." Her expression went carefully neutral. "I am practical," she said. "Right," he said. He bedded the horse, then straightened and turned to face her fully in the bar of light coming through the barn door. She looked back at him with those amber eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and he made a decision. "I want you to know something," he said. "I suspect you are going to tell me regardless of what I want," she said. "Fair enough," he said. I want you to know that I did not arrange this because I needed labor or because I wanted someone to cook for me or because I had any particular notions about what an orc woman is or is not. I arranged this because Gideon Pratt told me you were choosing this freely, which meant you must have reasons of your own, and I thought that was worth respecting. So whatever you need, time, space, the barn instead of the house, your own room, none of this at all, you can have it. You are not a debt to be collected, Rogash Mudborn. I just want you to know that. The barn was quiet except for Ashbone shifting in her stall and the cattle moving in the far pen. Rogash was looking at him in a way that was difficult to read. There was something happening behind those amber eyes, something complicated, something that had not been there a moment before, but she did not let it reach her face for long. "The house," she said at last, "will be acceptable." He nodded. "Come on then," he said. "I will put water on for tea and you can sit down and not press your hand to your side for 5 minutes. "I am not," she began. "You have been doing it since you came down the trail," he said, already walking toward the barn door. "I am a fair observer. Tea first, then we can argue about whether you are hurt." She followed him. And if the corners of her mouth moved just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, well, the barn light was dim and Harlan was already ahead of her, so neither of them had to acknowledge it. The cabin was warm from the banked morning fire. Harlan stoked it back to a proper blaze while Rogash stood in the doorway and took in the space with those measuring amber eyes. It was a good cabin, not elegant but solid. Log walls chinked with clay and horsehair. A stone hearth taking up most of the east wall. A table with 2 benches, hand-planed and sturdy. A curtained sleeping area and a second, smaller room off the back that Harlan had originally used for storage but had cleared out 2 weeks prior, telling himself it was just practical housekeeping and not anticipatory preparation. Pine shelves above the dry sink. A rifle above the door and a brace of knives on the wall beside it, and a row of iron hooks for coats and gear. It looked, Rogash thought, like a place where someone intended to stay. She had not been in many places that felt that way. The Mudborn clan moved with the seasons. Hide tents struck and raised across 3 valleys as the game moved and the weather dictated. This was something different, something rooted, something that said, "I will still be here when the winter comes and the winter after that." She did not know how she felt about that. She was, at this moment in her life, very uncertain about how she felt about a great many things, and she had decided that the best policy was to feel as little as possible until she had enough information to feel things safely. Harlan put the kettle on and pulled a chair from the table. "Sit," he said, not unkindly. She sat, and she hated that it was a relief. He brought her black tea in a thick clay mug and sat across from her with his own, and they looked at each other across the scrubbed pine table in the firelight of his small, solid cabin, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. "What happened to your side?" he asked, not demanding, just asking. "I told you, Cairn Wolf. Will you let me look at it?" She considered him. "If you touch the wound to examine it," she said, "I need to know you will not flinch at what you find. I have had humans flinch. It makes the experience worse." "I have cleaned wounds in the field," he said. "On people and animals both. I do not flinch." She set the mug down and unlaced the left side of her leather bodice enough to lift the hem of her shirt, revealing the wound, 3 parallel claw marks across her ribs, sealed now with dried moss compress, and what looked like a braid of gut suture that she had indeed put in herself. The stitches crooked but functional and showing no heat of infection, just the deep bruised green of orcish healing flesh. Harlan leaned forward and looked carefully without touching. The stitching was competent. The wound margins were clean. He sat back. "You did good work," he said. "I would have done it the same way." She looked at him. He met her eyes without looking away. "You may relace," he said, and turned to refill the kettle. She laced her bodice while his back was turned, and she allowed herself, privately in the silence of her own chest, to feel something small and cautious that she could not yet name. She had been prepared for him to be anything dismissive, overbearing, cruel, foolishly romantic, or worst of all, pitying. She had not been prepared for this steady, quiet, matter-of-fact quality that seemed to be simply how he was made. She did not trust it yet. She had not survived 24 years, half of them on the border of territories that humans and orcs had fought over for 3 generations, by trusting things before she understood them. But she cataloged it. That afternoon, once Harlan had insisted she rest an instruction she resisted for 45 minutes before her body overruled her will. He went back out to repair the fence line he had abandoned, and Rogash lay on the narrow cot in the back room and stared at the ceiling and thought about how she had gotten here. She had left her clan not because she was cast out, but because she had chosen to go. The Mudborn clan was her blood, her kin, the people who had raised her and taught her to track and fight and read weather and bind wounds. She loved them, genuinely, with the fierce and uncomplicated love of belonging. But she was not the kind of woman who fit quietly into the space that had been made for her. She was too loud in council, too willing to argue the elders, too interested in the world beyond the 3 valleys the Mudborn roamed. Kira, the clan elder who had sponsored her to the Dunhello Council, had looked at her across the council fire one night 3 months ago and said, "You want something we cannot give you here, young one. Go and find it and come back to us when you have." It was not a rejection. It was, in its own way, the greatest gift Kira had ever given her. What she wanted, she thought, what she had always wanted was a place that was hers, not the clan's place that she shared and moved through as part of the larger body. Her own ground, her own walls, something she had built and could keep. She was not sure yet whether this cabin could be that. But the man who had built it had offered it to her with open hands and a direct gaze and no conditions attached, and that was more than she had expected to find. She slept, despite herself, deeply and dreamlessly. She woke to the smell of something cooking and the sound of Harlan moving around the main room with the particular thoughtful quietness of someone who knows there is a sleeping person nearby and is choosing to be gentle about it. She lay still for a moment, listening to that gentleness, before she rose. The first 2 weeks were careful and interesting. They were not easy, not in the way that simple and easy are easy. They were the kind of careful that comes when 2 intelligent people decide, without saying it aloud, to try to understand each other before they judge. Harlan showed her the farm the way he would show something he was proud of but not boasting about, just matter-of-factly, walking her through the south pasture and the grain store and the root cellar and the winter wood stack, explaining what each thing was for, and why it was arranged the way it was. Rogash asked questions that were precise and practical, and showed that she had more knowledge of land and animals than he had initially assumed. She knew plant cycles from her years reading the landscape for the clan, and she knew the signs of sick livestock before they became crises, and she knew how to read weather off a ridge line better than anyone Harlan had ever met. She also knew how to be silent in a way that was not uncomfortable. She did not fill space with talk for its own sake. She said what she meant and then stopped, which Harlan found deeply, unexpectedly refreshing in a frontier life that was long on wind and short on substance. He gave her space. He did not push. He put her things in the back room without comment and made no assumptions about sleeping arrangements, and he cooked in the evenings and they ate together at the table and talked or didn't, depending on what the day had brought. He asked her about the Mudborn clan with genuine interest rather than anthropological curiosity, which she appreciated. She asked him about the homestead and his life before it, which surprised him. Most people assumed the homestead was all there was of him. "Where did you come from before this?" she asked him on the 4th evening while they were eating stew by the fire. He was quiet for a moment. "Town called Ferris Creek, east of the Graywood. My family was townspeople. My father ran the mill. I did not want the mill. I came west when I was 22 and found the river bottom land and bought the deed with 5 years of mill wages I had saved." He looked at the fire. "My mother thought I was lost." "Are you?" Rogash asked. He looked at her. "No," he said. "I think I found it actually. I just had not yet found anyone to share it with." She considered that for a long moment without speaking, and then went back to her stew, and Harlan watched the firelight play across the angular green-gray beauty of her face and felt something in his chest that he recognized, distantly, as trouble. It was not trouble he minded. On the 8th day, the trouble arrived from a different direction. Rogash had been in the yard behind the cabin, splitting wood. She had asked for the axe that morning with such direct practicality that Harlan had simply handed it over. And Harlan was at the barn when he heard the wagon coming down the main trail, and looked up to see 3 men from Dunhallow town on the bench, with 2 more riding alongside. Their faces said everything before they opened their mouths. Harlan walked out to the gate, wiping his hands on his work trousers, and took up a position in the middle of the trail with the kind of calm that was actually the opposite of calm, and that any man who had been in a fight would recognize immediately. The wagon slowed. The man on the bench, heavy-jowled, wearing a trader's coat with a council badge on the lapel, looked down at Harlan with the studied neutrality of a man who has decided not to be openly hostile and cannot quite carry it off. "Rhodes," the man said. He was called Dermot Vassall, and he ran the Dunhallow trading post and served on the settlement council, and he had made his opinions about the Treaty of Dunhallow's marriage provisions loudly known on more than one occasion. "Vassall," Harlan said. "Heard your orc bride finally showed up. Rogash Mudborn arrived 3 days ago," Harlan said. "Is there something I can help you with?" One of the riders shifted in his saddle. The 2 on horseback were young, barely 20, Harlan guessed, with the particular tight-jawed look of young men who have been told the world owes them a shape and find that it does not always cooperate. "Council just wants to make sure the arrangement is on record," Vassall said, "for the registry." "Then come to town and look at the registry," Harlan said. "It is a public document." "Some folks have concerns," Vassall said, "about bringing orcs into the settlement, especially Mudborn clan. They have a reputation." "As do I," Harlan said pleasantly, a movement behind him. He did not need to turn to know that Rogash had come around the side of the cabin. He felt her presence the way you feel a fire behind you, the warmth, the direction, the certainty that something powerful is there. He heard the rider's eyes move to her. He heard one of the young men make a sound low in his throat. He held his position. "Rogash Mudborn is my wife under the treaty arrangements," Harlan said, his voice still pleasant, still level. "She is on my land and under my welcome, and that is the beginning and the end of what is relevant here. If the council has official business, send the registrar with the proper forms. If not, I have a fence to finish." Vassall looked at him for a long moment, then looked past him at Rogash, and then looked at Harlan again with an expression that had curdled into something between resentment and reluctant acknowledgement. He knew Harlan Rhodes. He knew the man had 140 acres free and clear, had never been in debt to the trading post, had the respect of every rancher in the valley, and was not inclined to be moved by social pressure. "Have it your way," Vassall said. "I usually do," Harlan said. The wagon turned. The riders followed. Harlan stood in the gate and watched them go until the dust of the trail had settled, and then he turned around. Rogash was standing 6 feet behind him, arms loose at her sides, axe still in her right hand. She was looking at him with an expression he could not quite interpret, something that was equal parts assessment and something rower than that. "You did not move," she said. "No," he said. "You did not apologize for me or explain me or step aside." "No," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded. Once, a small, precise nod that he suspected was the Mudborn clan equivalent of a great deal more, and turned and walked back to the woodpile. Harlan stood in the gate for another moment, breathing the cold mountain air, and told himself very firmly that the warmth spreading through his chest was just the exertion of the morning. It was not. The first real frost hit 2 weeks later, turning the meadow grass silver and sending the last of the autumn color tumbling off the ridge. Harlan spent the day banking the cabin's foundation with earth and straw, and Rogash worked alongside him without being asked, moving efficiently, and with a knowledge of winter preparation that he was starting to expect of her and still found quietly remarkable. They worked together well. They had fallen into a rhythm in those 2 weeks that felt much older than 2 weeks, the way that two people who are genuinely suited to each other sometimes fall into rhythm before they have admitted to themselves or each other that they are suited. That evening, while Rogash was rebraiding her hair at the table and Harlan was oiling the leather of his saddle by the fire, she said, without looking up, "You are looking at me." "I am," he said. "You have been," she said. "I know," he said. She finished the braid and turned to look at him, and the firelight was very warm, and they were only the length of the table apart. He met her amber eyes with those level dark ones of his and said nothing else because there was nothing that needed saying. "I do not know what this is yet," she said. "Neither do I," he said, "but I am not in a hurry." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me something true." He thought about that. "I was relieved," he said. "When you came down that trail, I thought you were not coming, and I had spent 6 weeks half hoping you would not because I was afraid. And when I saw you on that horse, barely staying in the saddle and absolutely refusing to show it, I was relieved in a way that surprised me." The fire crackled. She was very still. "Relieved because I arrived?" she asked. "Or relieved because of what you saw when I arrived?" "Both," he said honestly. She turned that over for a moment. "I was also afraid," she said. "Before I came, Kira called it courage, I called it stupidity. I had no way of knowing what I was walking into." "And now?" he asked. Her amber eyes moved around the cabin, the fire, the shelves, the table they were sitting at, the man across from it, and then came back to his face. "Now," she said, "I think Kira was right. As she usually is." It was not a declaration, but in the language they were developing together, careful, honest, unhurried, it was something important. Harlan felt it land in his chest and stay there. He went back to oiling the saddle, and she went back to her braid, and the fire burned steadily between them. The incident at Dunhollow Market changed things. It happened 3 weeks after Rogash's arrival, when Harlan took the wagon into town for winter stores: salt, flour, lamp oil, wool cloth, and Rogash rode Ashbone alongside. Because Ashbone's leg had healed clean and Rogash had been in the same 5 acres for 23 days, and had begun to give Harlan looks that he recognized as the particular tightly controlled impatience of someone who needs more sky over their head. Dunhollow was a river settlement of about 400 people, built along the east bank of the Greywood River at the point where the mountain trail came down from the pass. It had a main street of packed earth, a trading post, a tavern called the Hound and Halter, a blacksmith forge, a mill, a dry goods establishment, and a council house with a tin-roofed porch. It had been a conflict town, once one of the places where the war between the border settlements and the Orcish clans had been most intense, where raids and retaliations had left real damage on both sides. The Treaty of Dunhollow was named for it specifically because the peace that ended that war had been signed here, on the council house porch. 20 years had passed. The damage was mostly healed, in the way that physical damage heals. The other kind of damage takes longer. They drew eyes from the moment they rode in on the main street. Harlan drove the wagon with the steady equanimity of a man who had been drawing eyes his whole life in one context or another, and had long since made his peace with it. Rogash rode Ashbone with her spine straight and her chin level and her amber eyes moving in careful arcs across the street, cataloging exits and positions, and the specific weight of each look that landed on her. A lifetime's habit of moving through spaces that were not built for her. They stopped at the dry goods first. The owner, a thin woman named Balder, served Harlan with clipped efficiency and pointedly directed every comment and question to him, as if Rogash were either invisible or decorative. Rogash noticed. She said nothing. The trouble came at the trading post, when they were loading the wagon with the flour sacks, and a young man, one of the 2 riders from 3 weeks before, stepped off the post's raised boardwalk and planted himself in the middle of the wagon path with his thumbs in his belt and a studied expression of belligerence on his face. Behind him, 4 or 5 men had drifted out of the post's doorway. "Rhodes," the young man said, You are blocking the trail with that wagon." "I will have it moved directly," Harlan said, tying off the last flour sack. He had not turned around yet. He did it now slowly and looked at the young man and then at the men behind him. "Got a problem with your woman there," the young man said. "Mudborn clan marked 3 men dead in the Hollow Creek raid 12 years ago. My cousin was one." Harlan stepped down from the wagon. The young man had expected this, and he held his ground, which took more nerve than Harlan wanted to give him credit for, because Harlan was not small and the expression on his face was no longer equable in the least. "I am sorry about your cousin," Harlan said. "I mean that. The Hollow Creek raid was an evil thing, and grief has a long reach. But Rogash Mudborn was 12 years old at the time of the Hollow Creek raid, and she was 3 valleys away with the Mudborn winter camp, and she has nothing to answer for to you or anyone else on this street." The young man's jaw tightened. Behind him, the men shuffled. 1 or 2 of them, the older ones, had the decency to look uncertain. "She is Mudborn clan," the young man said. "She is my wife," Harlan said, and the word came out with a quiet, final weight that was not aggression but was its own kind of immovability. He was standing between the young man and the wagon, between the young man and Rogash, and he had not raised his voice or his hands, and he was not going to move. From the corner of his eye, he saw Rogash swing down from Ashbone's saddle and come to stand at his right shoulder, not behind him, not deferring, just there, present and level and composed, with her arms loose at her sides and her amber eyes on the men across the street with an expression that was perfectly, deliberately calm. A long moment passed. An older man at the back of the group muttered something. Another man shuffled his feet. The young man with the belligerent jaw looked from Harlan to Rogash and back again, and read in both of them the same clear signal. "This ground is held, and you will take nothing from it today." He stepped aside. Harlan climbed back to the wagon bench. Rogash remounted Ashbone. They continued down the main street toward the mill at the same unhurried pace they had come in at, and Harlan did not look back. When they were out of town on the trail home, Rogash rode up alongside the wagon and looked at him from Ashbone's saddle. "My wife," she said. "That is what you are," he said. "Under the treaty registry," she said. "Under the treaty registry," he confirmed. "And under every other thing I know, which is that you came down a mountain trail for 3 days injured and alone, and arrived at my door still standing. And I am not a man who is going to step aside and let someone who never did anything like that in his life make you feel small on a street you have every right to walk." She was quiet for a long time. The wagon wheels turned on the trail. The mountains rose on both sides, white-capped and enormous, and the Graywood River ran cold and silver below the trail's edge. "Thank you," she said at last. The words were simple and they came from somewhere real, and Harlan heard that. "Nothing to thank me for," he said. "It is just the truth." She rode alongside him the rest of the way home in a silence that was entirely different from the careful silence of the first days. It was warmer. It was something that both of them sat in and felt the shape of without needing to name it yet. Gideon Pratt came to supper 4 days later, as he had been known to do, and brought a bottle of plum spirits and his own bowl, which he said was because he trusted his plum spirits but not his luck with borrowed crockery. He was a tall, lean old man with white hair and the deeply weathered face of someone who had spent 60 years outdoors, and he had a manner with Rogash that Harlan had noticed, easy, direct, respectful, the manner of a man who had orcish grandchildren and had long since let his assumptions be replaced by experience. Gideon asked Rogash about the Mudborn winter territories and listened to her answers with genuine attention, and he told her about the summer his daughter had gone to the Dunhallow Trade Fair and come back changed, in the best possible way, and he told her about his grandchildren, 8-year-old twins named Finn and Cora, who could outrun every child in the valley, and had their father's gray-green skin and their mother's laugh. Rogash listened to the story of those children, with an expression that Harlan was learning to read, the one where she was feeling something she had not decided, yet weather to show. After Gideon had gone, tramping back across the night pasture with his lantern swinging, Harlan and Rogash stood on the cabin's narrow porch in the cold, looking at the stars. "He is a good man," Rogash said. "He is the best man I know," Harlan said. "He told me once," she said, "before I left the clan. Kira told me about him, actually about the Pratt family, about what they had built with his daughter's family. She said, not every human man is a locked door. Some of them open." She paused. "I thought that was either very wise or very naive, depending on what I found." "Which was it?" he asked. She looked at the stars for another moment. Then she turned and looked at him in the lantern light from the cabin door, and something in her face had let go of something. "Wise," she said. He reached out very slowly and took her hand where it rested on the porch rail. Just her hand, his fingers closing over hers, no more than that. She went still, but she did not pull away. She looked down at their joined hands, his, the warm brown of sun-worked skin, large and calloused. Hers, the deep riverstone green, equally calloused, equally capable, and then looked up at him with those amber eyes that had been measuring him since the moment she came down the mountain trail, and found, he thought, what she had been looking for. Her fingers tightened against his. They stood like that in the cold, under the enormous frontier sky, and the stars turned overhead, and it was nothing and everything. The winter came hard that year. It came as winters always did in the Greywood territory, not with warning but with an ultimatum. One day the ridge was frosted at dawn and clear by noon, and the next day the sky dropped to within 100 feet of the earth, and the snow began and did not stop for 4 days. By the time the first blizzard had blown itself out, the homestead was buried to the fence rails. The cattle were in the barn and burning through their winter hay faster than Harlan had budgeted for. And Ashbone had developed a rattling cough that kept both Harlan and Rogash in the barn through 2 nights, treating it with steam and herbs from Rogash's traveling kit, which turned out to contain medicinal knowledge that Harlan's almanac had never introduced him to. They worked in close quarters through that winter, and they learned each other the way 2 people only can in close quarters: every habit and preference and small irritation and deeper grace. Harlan was methodical, steady, sometimes frustratingly calm when Rogash wanted to argue a thing through loudly. Rogash was fiercely direct, occasionally overconfident, and had a way of seeing to the heart of a practical problem with a directness that cut through every layer of overthinking Harlan was inclined to apply. They argued, genuinely argued, twice. Once about how to shore up the south barn wall against the snow load, and once about a more personal thing that was not really about what they said it was about. And both times they found their way through the argument to the other side, and both times the other side was better and more honest than where they had been. On a night in the deep of January, when the temperature had dropped low enough that the frost on the inside of the cabin windows was finger-thick, and the fire was burning as high as Harlan dared, they lay in front of the hearth on the accumulated blankets and sleeping furs, close together for warmth, the way they had been sleeping since the 2nd week of December, when the cold had made the back room impossible and practical sense had settled the matter without either of them needing to address it directly. Rogash was lying with her back against his chest, his arm over her waist, both of them watching the fire. He could feel her breathing slow and even and real, the aliveness of her, the warm, solid weight of her against him, and it was the most settled and right that Harlan Rhodes had felt in years. "What are you thinking?" she asked out of the darkness. "Thinking that I am happy," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "That is a dangerous thing to say." "I know," he said. "I said it anyway." She turned in his arms then, a careful, intentional turn, until she was facing him, until they were face to face in the firelight with barely an inch of warm air between them. Her amber eyes were very close, very clear, and there was something in them that was not measured or cautious or calculated. It was just her, fully present, fully open. "I am also happy," she said. "I did not expect to be. I want you to know that. I came here with very low expectations and you exceeded them, which is irritating." He laughed softly, and she did too, Just a brief warm sound, and then neither of them was laughing because the inch of air between them had somehow become less, and his hand had come up to her jaw, and her eyes had not moved from his, and he kissed her. It was careful and questioning at first, a real first kiss, uncertain of its welcome even after everything, because some things you cannot assume. And then she kissed him back with a warmth and a sureness that resolved every uncertainty at once, her hand coming up to fist gently in the front of his shirt, both of them adjusting toward each other in the combined light and warmth of the fire, until there was no more air between them at all. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, she looked at him in the firelight with an expression he had never seen on her before, something completely unguarded, something that was simply Rogash without any of the armor she carried so skillfully. "That took you long enough," she said. "I wanted to be sure," he said. "You could have asked," she said. "I know," he said. "I was being careful." "You are always careful," she said, with a hint of fond exasperation. "You have not complained until now," he pointed out. She considered this. "No," she said, "I have not." She settled back against his chest, his arm finding its place around her, and the fire burned down slowly into its warm red heart, and outside the blizzard pressed against the cabin walls and found no way in, and they slept. Winter gave way to a slow and gradual spring, the snow retreating up the ridge day by day, the river running high and cold with the melt, the first green appearing at the south fence line where the drainage ran and the sun hit first. Harlan plowed the east field for spring planting, and Rogash worked the furrows behind him, breaking clods and pulling stones with the methodical strength of someone who has been working the land in one form or another their whole life, even if her land had always moved under her feet before this. One morning in early April, she stood at the east fence looking out across the plowed field with her hands on the top rail, and Harlan came and stood beside her and looked with her. "I have been thinking," she said. He said, "about the south meadow. It is good bottomland, better than the east field. The drainage is right and there is more sun in the afternoon. If we turned it for oats instead of leaving it as pasture, you would gain at least 20% on your grain yield." He looked at the south meadow, genuinely considering it. "You said you," she noted. "I should have said we." He turned to look at her. "You said you first," he said, "and then you corrected it." She met his gaze. "I have been thinking about whether this is mine," she said with her characteristic directness. "Whether I have the right to think of it as mine." He turned fully to face her, leaning one elbow on the fence rail. "Rogash," he said, "I want you to think of it as ours, but I am not going to tell you to feel something you do not feel. What I can tell you is that from where I stand, this farm makes more sense with you in it than it ever did without you, and I am not talking about the labor." She looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way she always did, thoroughly and without flinching. "I want to send for some things from the Mudborn camp," she said. "Seeds that my clan uses, root medicines, some tools. I want to bring pieces of what I know into this place." "I want that too," he said. "I would also like to bring Kira here eventually," she said. "My elder, I want her to see this." "Then we will build a guest room," he said simply. The ease of his answer stopped her. She had been ready, she realized, for negotiation, for conditions, for reluctance, for the particular tightness of a man who does not fully want the parts of his wife that existed before him. She had not been ready for this. "Just like that," she said. "Just like that," he said. "She is your family. I want to know your family." Rogash looked at the plowed field for a moment, and then back at him, and the expression on her face was one he had not seen before, open and sure and deeply warm, with none of the measuring quality it usually carried. She reached out and took his face in her hands, the way she had seen his kind do, and kissed him in the April morning light at the fence line with the cold river running below and the mountains white and enormous above. He kissed her back with everything he had, both arms going around her, both of them standing in the mud of the plowed field because it was the field they were planting together, and that seemed exactly right. The spring and summer that followed were the most alive months Harlan Rhodes could remember in years. The south meadow was broken for oats, which grew in thick and golden, and vindicated Rogash's read of the soil entirely. A courier went to the Mudborn winter territory with a letter from Rogash, and returned 3 weeks later with a bundle of seeds and roots and a carefully wrapped set of orcish tools. A soil knife with a blade curved differently from any he had seen, a seed dibble of hardwood and bone, a string of drying herbs he could not identify but that Rogash catalogued for him in careful detail. With the tools came a letter from Kira that Rogash read alone in the back room and came out from with eyes that were red but steady, and simply said, "She is pleased," and went back to her planting. Gideon's grandchildren, Fen and Cora, came twice that summer to visit, and Rogash was unexpectedly wonderful with them. She taught them the orcish tracking game she had learned as a child, laying false trails through the meadow grass, and watching them solve it with crows of delight. And she told them stories in the clan tradition, long, shape-changing stories that built and rebuilt their world, that did not resolve the way human stories did but spiraled outward instead, like something alive. Harlan watched her tell those stories in the firelight on the porch, and felt the steady accumulation of something in his chest that was larger than affection and more certain than hope. The town of Dunhallow remained complicated. There were people in it who would never fully accept what they saw when Harlan and Rogash came to market together, and Harlan had made peace with that fact as a fact of the world he lived in rather than something to be repaired on any timeline he controlled. But there were also people who were different. Marta at the dry goods establishment, who had been clipped and dismissive that first winter, began to speak to Rogash directly and with genuine respect after an incident in June, when Rogash noticed that Marta's eldest child had a tooth infection that needed lancing, and performed the procedure in the back room of the store with the clean skill of someone who had done field medicine for a decade. After that, Marta was transformed. There was the blacksmith, Jediah, who was half-deaf and did not care much what anyone looked like as long as they knew a well-balanced tool from a bad one, and who spent 40 minutes arguing pleasantly with Rogash about the comparative merits of orcish soil, knives versus frontier-forged varieties before they reached a mutual conclusion that both traditions had their strengths. Small things, slow things, the patient accumulation of a reality that was different from the one the town had expected. Vassal remained an obstacle. He used the trading post's supply authority to make small, deliberate difficulties, running short on items Harlan needed, adding surcharges he applied to no one else, making comments in public that were crafted to be just deniable enough to avoid direct confrontation. Harlan dealt with this by building a supply relationship with a merchant in the next valley who was happy for the business, and by being absolutely consistent in his public dignity, and by never, not once, giving Vassal the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Rogash dealt with it by ignoring Vassal with such complete and focused indifference that it was, Harlan privately thought, the more devastating response. On a late August afternoon, when the oat harvest was in and the barn was full, and the south meadow was showing the scorched gold of midsummer grass, Harlan was fixing a wheel rim on the wagon in the yard when he heard Rogash's footstep behind him. He knew her step now, its specific weight and pace, the way you learn the sounds of a place that is yours. He looked up. She was standing with her hands at her sides and her amber eyes on him, and an expression on her face that he could not quite read. "I need to tell you something," she said. He set down the hammer. "All right," he said. "I received another letter from Kira," she said. "Clan matter. There is a dispute in the Eastern Valley between two subclans that needs a mediator who knows both the human treaty law and the clan council protocols. Kira asked for me." He was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he said. 3 weeks, maybe 4. "That is a long time," he said. "Yes," she said. "I know." She was watching him carefully, and he recognized the quality of the watch. She was looking to see whether he would try to hold her, whether the warmth between them would turn possessive, whether the place she had made here would suddenly have walls. He thought for a moment, honestly, the way he thought about things. He thought about 3 weeks without her step in the yard, without her voice across the table, without her at the south fence reading the sky. He thought about how that would feel, and he was honest with himself that it would feel like a lot. Then he thought about who she was. "Go," he said. "Your clan needs you, and you are good at exactly what they need. Go and come back." She looked at him. "Just like that," she said, echoing his words from the spring. "Just like that," he said. "But I am going to ask you something." "Ask," she said. "Come back," he said. It was simple, and it was everything he meant. She crossed the yard in 3 steps and kissed him with a directness and a warmth that settled every question. And then she stepped back and was Rogash again, composed, capable, amber-eyed, looking at him with that quality that had been measuring him since the mountain trail and had long since found what it was looking for. "I will come back," she said. "I always come back. I am only ever late by 3 days." He laughed, and she smiled at him, a real smile, her tusks showing, her whole face changing into something brilliant and warm, and it was one of the finest moments of his life. She left the next morning on Ashbone with a pack, a letter of credentials from the Dunhallow Council Registry, and Harlan's knife at her belt because she had admired it once and he had said take it and meant it. He watched her ride up the mountain trail until the trees took her, and then he went back to the wheel rim. 22 days later she came back, not on Ashbone, on a clan horse, a red roan, with Ashbone on a lead line beside her. She was accompanied by 2 Mudborn clan outriders on horseback who peeled off at the trail's edge with nods that conveyed something in the clan protocol. Harlan did not fully know but read as respect. And then it was just Rogash coming down the trail in the late afternoon light, in her dark leather and green shirt that were both travel-worn and muddy, with her braid coming loose exactly the same way it had the first morning she had come down this same trail. And his chest filled up all at once with everything he felt. He was at the gate. He had been at the gate for an hour, not waiting, just working nearby, definitely not waiting. She swung down from the roan and stood facing him across the gate, and her amber eyes were warm and a little tired and entirely herself. 22 days, he said. The second subclan needed more time than Kira had estimated, she said. I sent a rider. I got the message, he said. They looked at each other across the gate. Also, she said, Kira is coming in 3 weeks. I told her we were building a guest room. We started it in May, he said. It will be ready. She looked at the cabin and then at him. Harlan, she said. Yes, he said. I missed this, she said, simple and real. I missed you, he said, which was the more precise version of the same truth. She came through the gate, and he put his arms around her and held her in the last of the afternoon light, with the mountains above and the river below, and the south meadow gold on one side and the grain barn on the other, and she held him back with her face against his neck, and both of them breathing the same cold, clean air. It was the kind of homecoming that makes a place real. Kira came in October. She was a formidable woman of 50, and she had the manner of a person who had spent decades being the last word in complicated situations. Not a manner of arrogance, but one of deep, earned settledness, like a rock that has been in the river long enough that it no longer registers the current. She arrived with 2 retainers and a wagon of supplies and gifts for Rogash, and she took in the homestead, the cabin, the south meadow, and Harlan Rhodes with the same comprehensive amber gaze that Harlan had first encountered in Rogash and now recognized as a particular Mudborn clan quality. Over 2 days, Kira spoke with Harlan at length, in the direct and testing manner that he had also learned to recognize as Mudborn custom, a way of seeing a person that was neither rude nor gentle but was simply thorough. She asked him about his people, his history, his reasons for the arrangement, his intentions, his understanding of what Rogash had given up and what she needed to grow. He answered everything honestly and without performance, because he had learned from Rogash that honesty was the only currency that operated in this particular economy. On the evening of the second day, Kira sat across from him at the table while Rogash was outside checking on the horses and said, "She was always the one we could not keep still. Her mind, her eyes, they were always on the next valley. We call it the wanderer's heart. It is a gift and it is a burden." She paused. "What I see here is that she has found something to come back to. That is the second part of the wanderer's heart, the return. It took us many years to understand that she was not running from us but towards something. I am glad to see what she was running toward." Harlan thought about that for a moment. "She came down the mountain trail 3 days late and half injured and absolutely refused to admit either one," he said. "I knew right then." Kira looked at him with those elder's eyes. "Knew what?" "That I was going to love her," he said. "I did not know yet that I already did." Kira smiled, and it was Rogash's smile, the same brilliant sudden warmth, and said, "Good." Winter came again, their second winter. It was easier than the first in the ways that second winters always are. The hay was better stored. The cattle were healthier. The cabin's chinks had all been found and filled, and the two people in it had long since stopped navigating around each other and had found the particular grace of two people who have learned how to share a space fully, without competition or loss. On a night in December, in the warmth of the fire, Rogash told him something she had not told him before, about the Hollow Creek raid, about having been 12 years old and lying in the winter camp 3 valleys away listening to the elders argue about the aftermath, about understanding for the first time that the world her people and his people shared was built on a very long history of harm, and about deciding, even then, at 12, that she was going to do something about it if she ever found the angle. She told him about a young man in her clan who had died in the retaliatory raid that followed Hollow Creek, who had been her friend, who had been 17 years old and had not wanted to go but had gone because the clan went, and who was the real reason she had gone to the Dunhello Council with Kira and chosen to enter the arrangement, not escape and not ambition, but a belief that the small, stubborn, ordinary work of two people building a life across the line was worth doing. That it counted for something, that her friend's name deserved to be honored by the fact that she had not given up on the possibility of something better. Harlan listened to all of this without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "What was his name?" She looked at him. "Davin," she said. "Then let this count," he said. "Whatever we are building here, let it count for Davin." She did not cry. She was not much of a crier, as he well knew, but she reached across and held his hand with both of hers, and they sat like that for a long time by the fire. That winter deepened into the closest and most fully inhabited time of their lives together. The nights were long and the days were bright white and cold, and they built fires and cooked together and read aloud to each other, Harlan from a cracked almanac and a frontier gazette, Rogash from an Orcish oral tradition that she translated on the fly into his language, with occasional pauses to find the right word and occasional decisions to simply give up and use the Orcish word and teach it to him, which was better. They argued about small things and found each other on the other side. They laughed often. They learned each other's silences the way you learn a landscape, the shape of them, the specific quality, what they meant. And the physical life between them grew and deepened with the same patient accumulation as everything else. The warmth of sleeping close becomes something warmer, the held hands become something fuller, until one night in the long dark of January, when the world outside was entirely silent under 3 feet of new snow, and the fire was burning warm and low, it became something else entirely. It was unhurried, and it was real. And it was the kind of intimacy that comes from two people who have spent months learning exactly who the other person is. Every careful truth and shared silence and held hand and honest argument building toward this, toward the full giving of themselves to each other in the warmth and the dark. There was wonder in it, and tenderness, and moments of complete unguarded laughter, and a closeness that was nothing like anything Harlan had known before, nothing like anything Rogash had known before, a closeness that felt specifically and entirely like them, like the thing they had built together, like the life they had chosen. Afterward she lay with her head on his chest and his arm around her and the fire burning quiet, and he said very softly, "Rogash." "Yes," she said. "I love you," he said. He had not said it yet, not in those exact words. He said it now because it was exactly true and it was the right time. She was quiet for a moment. He felt her breathing change, slower, deeper, something settling. "I love you," she said. "I have for a long time. I was waiting for you to say it first because you are careful, and careful men need to be sure." "I was sure a long time ago," he said. "I know," she said, "but it was good that you said it." He held her and she held him, and the snow came down outside and covered the world in white, and the fire burned, and they were exactly where they had chosen to be. Spring came like a wager one. The oats went in early, and the south meadow gave another strong yield. An ashbone foaled in April, a leggy gray filly that Rogash named Dawn because she arrived at first light and announced herself with a volume that could be heard at the north fence. Harlan had been up since midnight with the mare and was exhausted and laughing, and Rogash was kneeling in the straw with the filly's head in her lap already, her amber eyes fierce with delight, and it was the kind of morning that lives long in memory. In May, Harlan rode to Dunhallow and came back with a document signed by the registrar, a land deed, amended and re-registered with both their names on it. He put it on the table in front of her without ceremony, and she looked at it and then looked at him. "You did not tell me you were doing this," she said. "I wanted it to be done before I mentioned it," he said, "in case there was difficulty." Was there? The registrar had a problem with the regulation, and I pointed out that the Treaty of Dunhallow is primary law, and he found the regulation improved after consideration, he said. She looked at the deed again. Her name, Rogash Mudborn, in the block letters of the Frontier Registry beside Harlan Rhodes on 140 acres of Greywood River bottom land. "This is mine," she said. "It is ours," he said. She looked up at him. "Harlan," she said. "Yes," he said. She stood up and kissed him in the way she had been kissing him for months now, without hesitation, without measure, fully and completely, her hands in his hair and his arms around her waist, both of them absolutely certain. That summer, for the first time, Harlan and Rogash hosted the midsummer gathering at their homestead, something that was done in rotation among the valley farms, and that had been skipped at their property by unspoken consensus the year before, because some of the valley farmers had not yet decided whether to include them in the ordinary social fabric. This year, Gideon Pratt made the suggestion loudly, and with the particular tone of an older man who has decided to stop waiting for things to improve on their own, and no one argued with Gideon, and so they came. 14 farmers and their families spread across the South Meadow on a long July afternoon, humans, and because of the Pratt family's presence, 3 orcs including Gideon's son-in-law Boraz, who was a large, quiet man with an easy laugh who helped Harlan lay the trestle table planks, and immediately formed a practical alliance with Rogash over the best method of staking a cooking fire in wind. Vassal did not come. 2 or 3 of the more stubborn townspeople did not come. But everyone who did come brought food and drink and sat in the South Meadow sun and ate together, and Rogash moved among them without her armor on, not performing ease, but genuinely present, genuinely warm, answering questions about the orcish seeds she had planted in the kitchen garden, and the medicinal herbs on the south wall, and the particular way the oats had come in so strongly this year. And by the end of the afternoon, there were children chasing down the foal around the pasture, and someone was playing a fiddle, and Marta from the dry goods establishment was asking Rogash about the tooth care tea that Rogash had given her for the children after the Lansing incident. And it was. Harlan thought, watching it all from the trestle table where he was refilling cups, the most ordinary and most extraordinary afternoon of his life. Gideon sat down beside him, hip creaking. "Look at this," Gideon said, gesturing with his cup at the meadow. "I am," Harlan said. "She is remarkable," Gideon said, not as a compliment, as a statement of observed fact. "She is," Harlan said, "the simplest and truest thing." "You know," Gideon said, "when I made the arrangement I thought it would be good for you. I did not think it would be this." "Neither did I," Harlan said. "What is this, exactly?" Gideon asked with the look of a man who knows the answer and wants to hear it said. Harlan looked across the meadow at Rogash, who was demonstrating something with a length of string to Fen and Cora, and 2 other children he did not know, all 4 of them leaning in with the focused intensity of children learning something genuinely interesting. She glanced up as if she had felt his eyes on her, which he was beginning to believe she could, some private frequency between them, and met his gaze across 30 feet of summer meadow with a look that was warm and easy and entirely, completely his. "It is home," he said. Gideon nodded. "Good," he said, and drank his cup. The autumn that year brought something new. Rogash told him in late September, standing in the kitchen garden with dirt on her hands and a composure that was completely belied by the brightness of her eyes. "I believe I am with child," she said. Harlan was very still for a moment. And then he was not still at all. He crossed the garden in 2 steps and picked her up, both hands at her waist, lifting her off the ground entirely, which startled her enough that she actually made a sound somewhere between a shout and a laugh, and then he set her down and held her face in his hands and looked at her. "You are certain," he said. "I have been certain for 3 weeks," she said. "I wanted to be sure before I said it." The Mudborn healer confirmed it by letter. 3 weeks, he said. "You are careful," she reminded him. "I was learning from you." He laughed and kissed her forehead and her temple and her cheek and then her mouth, and she was laughing too, both of them standing in the autumn garden in the gold light, and the mountains rose above them white and permanent, and the river ran below, and the life they had built held them both. "Will the clan need to be told by particular custom?" he asked when he could think again. "I will write to Kira," she said. "She will tell the clan in the proper form. She will be very pleased. She has been waiting for this." "She has," he said. "She told me on her visit," Rogash said. "She said half Mudborn children carry the bridge between 2 worlds in their blood. She said it is a great honor." She paused. "She also said they are usually very loud." Harlan looked at her. "That tracks," he said. She narrowed her eyes at him, but there was no suppressing the smile. The winter was different, with a child coming slower in some ways, more careful. The pace of their days adjusted with a quiet intentionality that Harlan moved into naturally, and that Rogash submitted to with only moderate argument. He built a cradle from cedar planks in December, with joints and joins that Rogash said were over-engineered, and that Harlan said were correct. She added carved Orcish clan marks to the headboard, symbols of belonging and protection that Kira had sent in a letter with detailed instructions, while he oiled the wood to a warm finish. And the cradle sat by the fire in the evenings, and they looked at it sometimes without speaking, both of them feeling the same enormous thing. The child came in late February, the hardest part of winter, in the way that important things have of arriving exactly when they are least convenient and most needed. The birth was hard, Rogash was strong, and the baby was determined, and the Dunhello midwife named Sella, who had been recommended by Marta, was exactly the right combination of skilled and unflappable, and she did not blink at the Orcish birth customs that Rogash had described from Kira's letters and asked to observe. Harlan was present for all of it, in the way Rogash had asked him to be present and useful, not hovering, and when Sella placed the child in his arms at last, wrapped in the birth cloth, he looked down at the small, fierce face, the faint gray-green blush of skin that was neither his color nor Rogash's but something new and particular to itself, the tiny eyes scrunched tight, the sound that was less a cry than an announcement. He looked at his son, and felt something break open in him that was too large for any word he knew. He carried the child to Rogash, who lay exhausted and absolute in the firelight, and placed him in her arms, and she looked at the child the way she looked at everything she cared about deeply, with complete, undivided, fierce attention. "Hello," she said to the child, just hello, simple and real as she always was. "What do we call him?" Harlan said, sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand on her arm, his eyes moving between her and the child. She looked at him. They had discussed names without resolving it, because both of them had been privately superstitious about naming a thing not yet arrived. "Davin," she said. "Harlan Rhodes." He looked at her. He remembered the fire and the winter night and the story she had told him. "Let this count. Harlan Rhodes," he said. "Yes." She rested her cheek briefly against the child's head, and Harlan put his arm around them both. And the fire burned in the stone hearth that he had built with his own hands, in the cabin that was now theirs, on the land that had both their names on the deed. And outside the snow fell quietly on the south meadow, and the roof of the barn and the mountain trail that came down from the pass. And somewhere up that pass the world was wide and complicated and slow to change, and full of both harm and grace. Down here at this particular fire, there was only this. Harlan Rhodes grew like a weed and was, as Kira had predicted, magnificently loud. He had Rogash's amber eyes and Harlan's dark curling hair, and his skin was the particular warm olive green that you would never have predicted from either parent alone, and that was his own completely. He learned to walk with the same focused determination as his mother, and learned to make people laugh with the same steady warmth as his father, and he was entirely, from his first words, himself. Kira came again in the spring of Darvin's first year, and this time she stayed for 3 weeks, and she and Darvin took to each other with the uncomplicated joy of a grandparent figure and a small child, which was what they were in every way that mattered. She held counsel with Rogash and formally acknowledged the homestead as a Mudborn-recognized family seat, a designation that had political weight in the clan, and that Rogash accepted with a solemnity that told Harlan this mattered enormously, more than she would say in plain language. That evening, after Kira had gone to the guest room and Darvin was asleep in the cedar cradle, Rogash sat with Harlan on the porch in the cool spring evening and said, "She has named this place in the clan records, Mudborn Roads, a joined name, for when Darvin is grown for his children's children, the clan will know them." He thought about that, about a name written in the clan records, about Darvin's children and their children, about the long reach of the choices made in a particular homestead at the edge of the Greywood territory. And Darvin in the frontier registry, he said. Both sides, she said. They sat with the spring night around them and the child sleeping behind them and the mountains above them, and Rogash leaned her head onto his shoulder, something she did now without thought, the way you rest on ground you know is solid, and he rested his head against her hair. "I was 3 days late," she said, out of comfortable quiet. "You were," he said. "And you were relieved when I arrived," she said. "You told me so." "I was," he said. "Why?" she asked, not testing, just wanting to hear him say it. He thought about it the way he thought about important things, with honest attention, without rushing. "Because I had been afraid," he said. "And when I saw you come down that trail hurt and stubborn and absolutely refusing to be either of those things, I understood that being afraid of you would have been the worst mistake of my life. The relief was the fear leaving." She was quiet. "And because," he added, "you were the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen, which is not something I was expecting to discover at the south fence line on a Tuesday morning, but there it is." She lifted her head and looked at him in the porch lantern light. All the amber warmth and direct intelligence and particular beauty that was exactly and entirely Rogash Mudborn, looking at him with everything she was. "I am glad I came," she said. "I am glad you came," he said. "I am glad you were at the gate," she said. "I will always be at the gate," he said. She kissed him in the spring evening, and the lantern swung, and the child slept, and the mountains stood above them in the last light, and the life they had built together held. It was not a perfect life. The world they lived in was hard and slow, and not finished with its prejudices, and there were days when it pressed against them, and they had to stand in its face again, shoulder to shoulder, with the same stubbornness that had carried Rogash down a mountain trail on an injured horse, and planted Harlan Rhodes at a gate with his hands quiet and his ground held. There were seasons when the farm ran lean, and seasons when it ran rich, and there were arguments that were real and a few that were difficult, and one that kept them cold toward each other for 2 days before they found each other on the other side of it, and understood something about each other they had not understood before. But there was always this: the fire in the stone hearth, and the names on the land deed, and the cedar cradle Harlan had built with over-engineered joints, and the seeds from the Mudborn territory growing in the kitchen garden, and Kira's marks carved in the headboard, and Rogash's amber eyes across the table every morning, and Harlan's steady warmth every night. There was the trail that came down from the mountain pass, and the gate he stood at, and the life that had arrived 3 days late and twice as fierce as anything he had imagined. He was relieved every single day. He said so, one evening years later, sitting on the porch with Davin asleep inside and Rogash beside him and a second child a few months from arriving and the south meadow silver with frost in the moonlight. "You know," he said, "I am still relieved. Every day." She turned to look at him and the moonlight was on her face, and she was beautiful the way the mountains were beautiful, absolutely, without apology, exactly as they were. "The fear is still leaving?" she asked. "No," he said, "the fear is gone, the relief is something else now." "What is it?" she asked. He looked at her, at this woman who had come down a mountain trail alone, and injured and refused to be diminished by either, who had stood at his shoulder in a hostile street, and at his side through hard winters, who had carried their child and named him for a boy who had not survived to see the world get better, who had brought her world into his and made something that was neither his nor hers but entirely theirs, who loved him with the same fierce, direct, wholly committed quality with which she did everything, who was the best thing that had ever happened to him, by a margin so large he could not measure it. "Gratitude," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand where it rested on the porch rail and laced her fingers through her hand, the deep river stone green, capable and warm, his the warm calloused brown and squeezed. "Good answer," she said. The moon moved over the Graywood Valley. The river ran below. The mountain stood above, white and permanent, older than the war and the treaty and the town and the homestead and the names on the deed, older than any of it. The fire in the stone hearth sent a thin line of smoke up through the chimney Harlan had built and into the clear cold sky, and it rose and spread and became part of the night. And on the porch of a cabin at the edge of the frontier, a man and a woman held hands and looked at the silver meadow and the mountains and the dark, and the child slept behind them, and the life they had built held. It always held.